Yesterday, two polls were released. Now, this is really quite important because it confounds, and this is, I guess, what I want to editorialize on this morning. Two polls were released yesterday, one by Television One News, the Varian poll that they conduct, and the other page poll by the Taxpayers Union, the Courier poll. The Taxpayer Union Courier poll is run monthly. I think the Varian poll is run, they have 7 or 8 a year, roughly. And a number of other polling agencies have fallen out because polls are extraordinarily expensive, certainly today, to run. But good on the Taxpayers Union Courier, they run them anyhow. And obviously so do Television New Zealand News, so they deserve a tick as well. Polls are very important. I've been in public life now for over 30 years. Over 30 years. And I have to say, if you think polls aren't important, believe me, politicians take an awful lot of notice about them. It's not just the figures that are broadcast, published, or communicated. It's not just the raw figures and the movement that there might or might not have been, but it's also, if you go into those polls and you start to look at them in a great more detail, and most obviously politicians do, they start to see where their support is waning, where they're strong, with which groups they need to target. And so those polls that are a bit more sophisticated and have a bit more information and a bit more sort of demographic or geographic of a basis to them, and the Taxpayer Union Courier poll would be a good example of that, those polls become very important at determining not just the self-perception and self-confidence of politicians, but actually how they change things. It's really, I cannot emphasize to you enough how much politicians, David Longer used to say, oh, they're poll-driven fruitcakes, talking about some politicians. But, well, with all due respect, those poll-driven fruitcakes are as much in the Labour Party as they are anywhere else. And one of the reasons, for example, Chris Hipkins, when he was made a little over a year ago, was it over? Oh, no, it's over a year ago, isn't it now? Oh, start of 2023. Oh gosh, it's well over a year ago. He was Prime Minister, and he incinerated so many policy positions that was so beloved of the previous Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, was because, and he didn't introduce a wealth tax or a capital gains tax prior to the election, was because he'd done the polls. And he had looked at them and he'd got the instant feedback from the community and said, this is not going to fly. We're not going to do this. We'll at least deserve some chance of winning some seats this election. If I do this, this will incinerate the lot. And as a consequence of that, that is why I say to you, just, and yes, last night's or yesterday's polls are important, and the politicians in Wellington will have received the message, and so will have the political apparatchiks, if you like, the policy makers behind the scenes, the researchers, the strategic advisors. They will have been watching this too. And here we go. The two polls that came out yesterday are not too dissimilar. They are, in two ways, and I'll come to those, two of the minor parties, they are, and not Te Pāti Maori, I might add, but I'll come to that in a second. But as a general rule, they tell the same story. And the story is this. Number one, this centre-right coalition of National, ACT and New Zealand First continues to maintain the level of support that it had collectively at the last election. Now that's quite remarkable. You're going through a cost of living crisis. Interest rates are stubbornly high, and inflation has robbed many, as Craig Stover will tell you, of real wealth. House prices have stalled and in some cases dropped, so people have had a real drop in their equity and their most significant investment. Job market has tightened. We've had tens of thousands of New Zealanders flee to Australia. We have at the same time had enormous social discohesion in this country, whipped up by a sensationalist media who to a large extent are unfavourable of the government because it's not their government. And yet here we are 14 months after the last election and the political dial has barely moved. It's extraordinary. the centre-right still maintain their political hold on this country as a consequence of New Zealanders just saying. And this is despite 14 months of the mainstream media doing their very, very best on any number of issues to try and denigrate, destroy, degrade, or otherwise disrupt this coalition government's agenda by the stories they run and the way in which those news stories are presented. You know, if I was the mainstream media looking at yesterday's polls, both the Courier and the TVNZ poll, I would be uttering one word, and it wouldn't be rhyming with Hunt. It would be bugger. Because the bugger would be, we've done our best, we can't do any better, and ta-da, look at this. The state-funded broadcasters, Television New Zealand News and Radio New Zealand newsrooms, the spin-offs, the newsrooms of this country, the stuffs of this country, they must be just sitting there, their entire newsroom when these polls came out yesterday afternoon, and been going, what the hell is wrong with New Zealand? Which, of course, is what they're saying. It's almost exactly the same conversation that the Democrats are currently, and the mainstream news media, having in the United States of America after the election of Donald Trump and the Republican domination of all of the various wings of the US government. And that is the same problem. What's the matter? And you almost get that in the coverage of the media. It's almost like, despite everything, and that was the sort of said through gritted teeth last night by Television New Zealand, despite everything, ta-da. And the really interesting thing, of course, is that Television New Zealand decided to actually parade the real fillip that these two polls have given to Pati Maori, as if this is some sort of, wow. In actual fact, it's just made Chris Hipkins' job worse. And it's made the centre-left's job harder of getting elected. If the answer on the left is the rise of Te Pāti Maori, a racist, illogical, stupid, and emotive political organisation, if the answer on the left is that you go and vote for Te Pāti Maori, and that you boost their political following as a consequence of the hikoi and whatever else they've been doing in Parliament, and on the wider traps, if that's the answer, Chris Hipkins is tied at the hip to Te Pāti Maori for the next election. And if the left have decided, the centre left, no, we're not going to vote for Labour. Oh God, the Greens, yeah, they're all a bit. We'll go and vote for Te Pāti Maori again. In other words, the centre left is getting more left, and that's really the message of yesterday's poll. The centre-left vote is going even more left. Now, one of the remarkable stories about last night's poll from the Television New Zealand one is that National's still at 37%. Now, when you think about it, National's done nothing. Oh, they've done really in the last month, since the last TV1 News Varian poll, on the big issue of the last 6 months. Nationals just stayed on the sidelines and really let their coalition partners, David Seymour and Winston Peters and Shane Jones, have as much coverage as they like. But that party vote of National has stayed adamantine. Why is that? It's because the centre of New Zealand, the groups who would normally look at Labour or National and think, well, it's one or the t'other this election, they're staying with National. And I would suggest to you, it's not necessarily, and please, Christopher Luxon, don't kill me for this or your press team, but it's not necessarily that National's doing a brilliant job. It's that the centre of this country is looking at the alternative centre-left alliance, and they're going, no, thank you very much. And last night's poll, which saw the rise of Te Pāti Maori, 5.5% in the Courier poll, 7% in TVNZ's poll, in actual fact makes Chris Hipkins and the Labour Party's job worse. Because they know that the future of their coalition is dependent upon Te Pāti Maori, and Te Pāti Maori is cannibalising both the Greens and them for its support. It's not taking any votes off the centre. It's not taking any votes off the centre-right. There are no votes from National or National or New Zealand First or ACT migrating to Te Pāti Maori. They are cannibalising one or two parties only, and they are the Greens and Labour. And really, Chris Hipkins has got to try and work something out over this Christmas. And here's a bit of fair advice to you, Chris. You've got to work out how to decouple yourself from Te Pāti Maori. You've got to work out how to appeal to the centre of New Zealand voting population, the people who make and unmake governments. But if you are being pushed further and further by the extremes of the left, and if Te Pāti Maori is becoming the repository for the left-wing vote, and they are getting stronger in their popular support, then you are tied to them by whatever artificial strictures exist. And you cannot cut them away. They are the Gordian knot of your frustration. And they will drag you down as well. They may be serving themselves. They may have found a flotation device amongst all the records of Te Pāti Maori. But Chris, they are dragging you down. And your party is drowning. And I'll say one other thing to the mainstream media. The mainstream media last weekend, or the weekend before, published a poll that was associated with the Labour Party conference. It was a Labour Party conference that showed that Chris Hipkins was the most popular political leader in New Zealand. In fact, he was the preferred Prime Minister. The polling was conducted by the Labour Party, commissioned for the Labour Party, and it was released to the mainstream media. It was even seized upon by right-wing commentators like Matthew Hooton, for example, who's gone mad, as some suggestion that it was all over the centre-right coalition. These two polls, by two totally different agencies, one Television New Zealand, which you'd have to say to a large extent has its political bias on the left, and Curio, which you'd have to say has been the most accurate polling agency for the last 6 years in this country, both tell the same story. And that is, Chris Hipkins, you're never going to be the Prime Minister of this country. And the Labour Party's never going to be governing if your left sees Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Narewa Paka and all the other racist ratbags as some form of answer to the left's problems. Good luck. And thanks. We'll be sitting here for the next 15 years. I guess centre-right, how old will Winston be in 15 years? Well, he'll still be Minister of Foreign Affairs based on these polls.